Hello, everybody. This is Fun Police, and I'm bringing you a Company of Heroes 3 build order. This build is based around the Special Operations Battle Group and focuses on utilizing some of the unique elements of it in order to release a very aggressive and powerful build order. I think this build actually can work in pretty much every single mode, although I've mostly tested it in 1v1 and 2v2. In larger team games, I don't have as much experience with this build, but I do think that there are some tools in here that are useful in team games, and if you are willing to alter and experiment, could make this work in 3v3 and even 4v4s. The foundation of this build is just very, very solid. If you enjoyed today's video and make use of the build, let me know down in the comments below. I'm always interested to hear if people maybe find a better way to utilize this build or find something that I haven't considered. And overall, I just enjoy hearing what people say. Anyway, let's jump into a game and we'll start talking about the exact build order.
Let's go.
When you first load into a match, the first thing you want to do is begin constructing your barracks as close to the edge of your base as possible, lock in special operations, and get an M29 Weasel out on the map. The M29 Weasel is easily the most important aspect of this entire build, and is the entire reason this works in the first place. The two big things the Weasel is going to provide is that it is able to deploy heavy machine guns, which means that we do not need to build the weapon support center, which is going to be saving us manpower and fuel. And this is going to be one of the crucial parts of the build, is that we are going to be ignoring as much as possible any side teching. We want to minimize the amount of fuel we spend on anything that is not building us towards our first light vehicle, as we're looking to have a very, very aggressive light vehicle that hits fast and very hard. The other thing that the M29 Weasel is going to provide is that it is, at Veterancy 1, able to provide medical healing. This is extremely powerful because it means that, similar to how we're skipping the weapon support center, we are also going to be skipping the medical station in the early parts of the game, instead using the Weasel to heal nearby infantry and then simply reinforcing at our base. Now, we of course do miss out on the ability for the medical center to recover wounded, but that is overall fine, because combined with skipping both the support center and the medical station, that is 35 fuel that we are going to save compared to if we were to build them otherwise. A third smaller thing that the Weasel does is that it is able to upgrade a 30 caliber machine gun, which means that it is able to provide early fire support to our riflemen. Now, once you have built the Weasel, you are going to simply build 3 riflemen. This is going to be your standard opener, and works against both the Wehrmacht and also the Desert Africa Corps. Riflemen as a unit are, at the start of a match, kinda weak. Without access to any of their upgrades and no grenades or veterancy abilities, these guys overall are kinda lacking. They don't deal a lot of damage and have to get close in order to try to beat enemy units. Simple demonstration of the US's performance against Grenadiers reveals that when they try to charge and gain cover, they overall are not the most impressive thing. Although the riflemen definitely will start to overwhelm the Grenadiers, they will bleed quite heavily, and it can go either way. And these is talking about Grenadiers, and they're going to potentially have they will be backed up by something like a Pioneer Squad, something like a MG42, or even just double Grenadiers. And Riflemen, as you see, although they can win if they rush just into the enemy, it's overall a pretty close call, and your rifleman squad will have to retreat after they win. As such, it is important that you try to back up your units as best as possible. And this is where we're going to make use of the Weasel and also the Scout Squad you start with. Keep them together with your riflemen in order to provide a little bit of extra oomph that will help your riflemen to actually win fights. The Weasel does this very well due to its high mobility alongside the MG that you're going to upgrade on it. Now, once you have your basic setup of 3 riflemen, a scout squad, and the Weasel, and the Weasel has its 30 caliber machine gun, generally, as soon as you have 50 munitions, you want the Weasel to plop down 1 machine gun, and then have a squad pick up that machine gun. This is going to be a similar thing to the Weasel, providing your riflemen with additional firepower in order to help suppress and deal with squads. The M1919 has a overall decent firing arc and is not a bad machine gun in its own right, although its firing arc is a little worse than that of something like the MG42. It is overall a capable enough machine gun to help your riflemen punch up against other enemy units and generally just maintain good map control. After you've done your M1919, you generally can start saving munitions for what is going to be the Scout Squad upgrade and then eventually bars on your riflemen. Or, if you need to, you can get an M1 mortar as a second team weapon and use it in order to help, say, deal with a pesky MG or something that is otherwise causing you a lot of hassle. We're not going to be having grenades more than likely, so the mortar can be a very effective way of helping to overcome a really annoying MG or something like that that is causing you a lot of problems. Regardless, once you have finished getting your machine gun out at least, it is time to generally build your support center. Now, you have access to 3 different support centers in the US. You have infantry, mechanized, and air support. And these all potentially have their uses, but I'll say straight out, the air support center is something you never want to go with for this build order. And I think it's currently the weakest support center there is. The reason being is that the Spec Ops building has access to its own airstrikes and is going to be spending a lot of munitions on its own abilities. You're not going to have the extra munitions floating around in order to use the airstrikes that comes from the support center. You also have the mechanized support center. The mechanized support center is never a bad option to pick up. The biggest thing is that it is a way to repair vehicles without building an engineer squad, which actually will matter in a bit for this build. But the bigger thing overall is that you are able to upgrade your late-game tanks. Notably, the Sherman tank, once fully upgraded with the 76mm improved armor and various other things, the mechanized just turns your Sherman into one of the best mediums there is, and they can be an extremely potent late game. However, that is kind of counterbalanced in this build by the fact that we don't have the access to half-tracks. Half-tracks arrive in the Weapon Support Center. So if we were to take the Mechanized Support Center, we're essentially doing nothing for ourselves until we get access to our late-game armor with the Tank Depot. And this build is potentially ending games before that. Now, if you are playing with a more late game oriented mindset, or notably if you're playing in team games, mechanized is probably the best option. However, for smaller game modes, I prefer the infantry. The infantry support center has 2 primary benefits to it. The first one is the captain retinue, and then you also have access to munition surplus. Now, these 2 things are going to be very, very powerful. Let's start by talking about the captain. The captain himself is not the best combat unit outright. Although he does have an LMG to provide fire support, the bigger things are the fact that he, 1, increases the experience of nearby infantry, or increases their experience gain, I should say, and then he also has some nice utility through things like flanking maneuver, rally to me, off-map mortar barrage, or mark vehicle, depending on which veterancy ability. He's overall just a great sort of support unit, and the big thing is that leadership is going to be great because riflemen get a pretty noticeable benefit when they reach veterancy 1, and that is their vet abilities. There are 2 veterancy abilities that are available to them. The first one is Pour It On Them, increasing the squad's fire rate and allowing them to suppress, or Sprint, allowing the squad to essentially run at full speed for a short while. Both of them do have their uses. Notably, Sprint can be very, very useful for quickly getting into a position or something like sprinting past a machine gun, but it only lasts for a few seconds. Instead, the much more effective one, and the reason that riflemen really can scale up very well, is Pour It On 'Em. Pour It On 'Em is an ability that, once pressed, allows the squad to just deal a lot more damage and overall be a much more effective unit. And let's show that off in a quick demonstration. So here's a quick demonstration of how the Pour It On 'Em ability works. I've given the Grenadiers 1 veterancy also, so they better match up to the Rifleman squad, but this is just an example to show off how the ability functions when the riflemen get close. As you can see, they have now suppressed the Grenadier, greatly lowering their damage and overall making them a lot more effective. And as you can see, they are now pretty significantly winning this. Although the Rifleman squad will be, or the Grenadiers will be unpinned in a moment here, they have lost tons of health and have pretty decisively lost this. And that is the real power behind the Pour It On 'Em ability. It is a free ability that is just on a cooldown, but once pressed, it turns your riflemen into true monsters. Remember, just without the ability, the riflemen only won with about 2 models left. And now they have actually nearly won entirely thanks to it, only losing a single model and another one being heavily damaged. It's a massive difference, and this is one of the big power spikes for it, which is why the captain helping you to gain veterancy is such a useful effect for it. Now that you have built your support center, it is time to make a decision based on what exactly you're going to be spending your fuel on. You really have 2 primary options. The first one, and generally the safer option, is to go for the motor pool. This is going to be aimed at rushing out your light vehicle very quickly, and is pretty much getting it out as fast as you physically can. It's the much safer option, as up to this point, our build has been notably lacking in terms of anti-tank options, and until we get our light vehicle, that is going to remain a real danger for us in case the enemy rushes out their own light vehicle. However, the other option is to tech into your bars. Now, bars are very big power spike for your riflemen. Combined with the veterancy 1 and Pour It On 'Em, riflemen turn from something that is overall a bit lackluster into truly terrifying infantry. Now, just take in mind that when you get the bars, you're also going to be spending more than likely resources to get the munition surplus if you've gone infantry, as this reduces the upgrade cost of weapons by 50%. Meaning that once you have this, upgrading all your infantry is going to only cost 30 per infantry rifleman squad, rather than 60. But that does mean it is 55 fuel and practically 250 manpower in order to get that, which is practically the same cost as the motor pool. So you're going to be significantly slowing down your light vehicle for the very fast power spike in bars. I would say that doing this early bar strategy is only a relatively reasonable option against the Wehrmacht. The Desert Africa Corps has the ability to rush out an 8-rad, and if you don't have something like a Chaffee to counter it, then you pretty much will get bulldozed and will just die. So it is very, very important that you have access to good AT against the Desert Africa Corps as quickly as possible. But assuming that we went with the motor pool first as the more standard option, we now have one final decision for this build. Get the Greyhound or get the Chaffee. Both vehicles have uses. The Greyhound is overall the better anti-infantry vehicle. It can be upgraded with a 50 caliber on top of it, and it's overall just much better at dealing damage to infantry. However, its ability to contest enemy armor is a lot less powerful. It has relatively low armor, just enough to resist small arms fire, and its gun is just not nearly as powerful as that of the one on the Chaffee. So this is one you're wanting to get if the enemy doesn't have any good light vehicles, or you can capitalize on it quickly enough in order to overwhelm the enemy. Its veterancy abilities allow it to have some utility. Most notably, the spotter ability can be very, very useful. Just giving it the ability to spot nearby vehicles and give nearby vehicles essentially better accuracy if it's nearby. This lets it scale a bit better into the late game and provide fire support to your other tanks. However, I would say the more common option that this build opts for is the Chaffee. Although it is slightly more expensive, costing a little more manpower and 10 more fuel, the Chaffee is armed with a 75mm gun and is overall probably one of the best light vehicles in the game. Although its anti-infantry power is not as high as the Greyhound, it is able to bully away any light vehicle and can even kill enemy medium tanks. It's pretty much the only light vehicle that scales in such a way, and that is very, very powerful. And this powerful anti-tank vehicle is really something we're looking for to cover up the fact that we don't have really any other AT. The Chaffee is also nice because it has the veterancy abilities of either flanking speed or seek and destroy, but it's just overall a very solid vehicle that is good at scaring away any enemy armor that they have. And it's not even that bad against infantry, although it definitely is not comparing to the Greyhound in terms of the damage. It does have a machine gun, and its 75mm gun can every so often nail a infantry model and kill it. So it's overall a very well-rounded vehicle that just guarantees you're not going to have any weakness to enemy armor after you get it. Now, if you're looking at a relatively standard build where you have about half the map captured, I would say that it's pretty reasonable that going into Motor Pool first, you're going to be getting your Greyhound or Chaffee around the 7 to 8 minute mark. That is, I would say, the reasonable time. If you've had a little bit of a rough game, it might drag on a little bit, but being able to get one out at 7 to 8 minutes is reasonable enough that it will counter any enemy armor that is starting to outscale your infantry. Notably stuff like the 8-Rad from the Desert Africa Corps or stuff like that. And that is namely what we are working towards in order to have counters to those options. Now, you could also have a variation of this build where you build the motor pool and then you tech bars and then you get an AT gun in order to have that AT running around without needing to build your Chaffee, and this allows you to get bars out a little bit faster. Now, this build is, I think, quite risky because it pretty much demands that you also pick up the grenade package. And the reason for that is that you really need snares in order to make an AT gun actually be able to deal with an armored vehicle. Otherwise, some armored vehicle will just simply drive around your infantry and get behind your AT gun, and then your entire capability to kill that vehicle is gone. So it is quite expensive, and is going to be delaying your tanks again, but it does give you arguably a bit of a safer timing to get bars a little early, but it does have downsides. Around the time that you're getting your light vehicle, or even a little bit before if you've had a lot of combat, the SSF Commando Squad should also be available to you. Now, the Commando Squad is actually a really strong squad. It is a 6-man team armed with a mixture of M1 Grands and Johnson machine guns, and it's overall really, really powerful. In fact, it is, I would say, probably the strongest US squad in the entire game, and that is just because it pretty much is able to go toe-to-toe with almost any Axis infantry at range and actually beat them or get very, very close to beating them. These guys are able to overpower Jaegers at range. They are able to almost beat a stormtrooper from the Wehrmacht, and they will also pretty much bulldoze any of the infantry seen in the Desert Africa Corps. They also have the ability to toggle to M9 bazookas and provide passive AT. If you get these guys while you're waiting for your light vehicle, this can also save up and relieve a bit of pressure from an enemy light vehicle while you wait for your Chaffee or Greyhound to finish. These guys are also the reason you might be able to get away with getting the bars earlier if you can rely on the commandos to keep enemy armor at bay while you try to work towards an AT gun or you try to get a light vehicle out yourself. They're overall really, really powerful. And they even have the M15 Willie Pete grenade, which is a white phosphorus grenade, that not only acts as smoke, but anything standing inside of it will take damage, essentially like an incendiary device. And that can be very, very powerful. These guys are just overall great, and you should always pick one of these up. In terms of the other options within the battle groups, I say raiding flares and smokescreen both have their own utility. You can pretty much pick whichever one you want. I would say smoke is a little more useful, but I'm a big fan of smoke in general, but you could also opt for the raiding flares for extra sightlines. And then down the other path, you have access to either assault operation or air resupply. Both of these have uses. Notably, assault operation makes your infantry even more insane, but you can also opt for the air resupply, which does a couple different things. The first notable thing is that you are able to drop it and get access to a machine gun, an AT gun, and a fuel crate, and this fuel crate actually contains 40 fuel within it, which is very, very powerful, as it can essentially allow you to turn 120 munitions into 40 fuel, which is actually a pretty good deal, and can help you rush out your Sherman tanks very aggressively. On the other side, you have marked vehicle or strafing runs. I generally prefer the strafing runs. They're overall pretty nice for suppressing infantry. They can mess up team weapons, and they can even kill light vehicles if the vehicle gets caught in it. And then the final thing is the whiz-bang. But we'll get to the whiz-bang in a minute because it's not very good. After you've gotten your Chaffee, your commandos, and anything else you're getting out of the motor pool, it's time to go for your late game, which is going to be Shermans in the tank depot. You're pretty much going to be saving fuel exclusively to go into the tank depot, and then you just simply want to build a couple Shermans. Shermans are really good. They are well-rounded. They're able to match up against enemy or Axis armor very effectively, and you just can't go wrong with them. If you're going up against certain units, you could get something like the Hellcat or the Sherman Bulldozer, but honestly, if you just build 2 or 3 Shermans, especially in like 1v1 and 2v2, that should be more than enough to carry you through a fight, an entire match. There's honestly not a whole lot to say here. Shermans are just really good in this game, and they're very, very powerful, and you can't make a mistake by picking them. Outside of that, the last thing I can talk about with this build is the Sherman Whiz-Bang. Now, the Whiz-Bang is a rocket artillery that is able to barrage. However, it's weird, and I don't think very good. Although it is a rocket artillery, and it actually does pretty decent damage overall, the problem with it is that its range is just not very good. And you can see this by its firing arc. If you look, this is an M1 AT gun, and it is at the edge of a firing range. The M1 AT gun should be able to land shots against the Whiz-Bang. And if you look at the Whiz-Bang, that is its maximum range right there. It cannot fire at that position before it has the move forward to fire. So it only barely outranges AT guns, and that isn't even talking about something like the 88s that the Axis have, which completely outranges the Whizbang. And because of this, the Whizbang I don't think is very good right now. Maybe it'll be buffed in the future and be worthwhile, but unless you're in team games and you're really looking for something to break the line with, I would not pick up the Whizbang. Just go with Shermans. Maybe get a Bulldozer Sherman if you're really desperate for some off-map, or again, the Whizbang, but really Shermans are all you're going to need. On top of that, you can also invest into upgrading some of your stuff for the Infantry Support Center, notably survival training. It is quite expensive, but giving 10 extra health to all your infantry just helps make them more durable. Pretty much your riflemen become absolute god tier. Being able to just completely wallop people while having some of the best stats for a mainline infantry, amazing firepower, and the incredibly powerful ability to pour it on them. If you build your medical station, you can also then use the Weasel as a frontline healing device. That is a very realistic option. And then otherwise, you can then get also the advanced logistics in order to slightly make it cheaper to reinforce, which can matter in the late game. But otherwise, that is most of the build. The big thing, again, to stress is that this build is focused around having a very aggressive light vehicle and then immediately following it up with bars in order to have a very strong power spike at the 7, 8, 9 minute mark, and then trying to use that to leverage you into a very comfortable late game or even win the game outright. So to round this video off, let's just talk about the build from start to finish in order to give you a clear and easy to follow guide. Start off by building an M29 Weasel at the start of a game. As soon as you have 30 munitions, put a 30 caliber on it in order to provide fire support. You're going to be building 3 rifles as your mainline infantry. As soon as you have an additional 50 munitions, deploy a heavy machine gun or mortar to continue supporting your riflemen. You also want to make sure your Weasel becomes a medical station in order to provide healing to your troops. Then you want to pick your support center. I would say infantry is the best for 1v1 and 2v2, although you can also go for mechanized if you're looking for stronger late game. Around the time you get your support center, but before you build your motor pool, you will probably be able to call in a commando squad, and you definitely should do that. They're very powerful. Now, once you have your motor pool up, you're choosing between the M8 Greyhound or the Chaffee. These are both going to ideally be hitting around 7 to 8 minutes into a game. The Greyhound is better at damaging infantry, but is a little worse against vehicles, while the Chaffee is relatively dominant against vehicles, but does a little less work against infantry. I would overall say the Chaffee is the superior option. Once you've built your Chaffee or Greyhound, it is time to go for the bar upgrade on your riflemen in order to get them scaling up and actually be competent units. You also can pick up munition surplus at this time if you win infantry. Then after that, you probably want to pick up an engineer squad in order for repairs. You can also get an AT gun if you feel like you need additional AT. This is a bit better if you want to go with the Greyhound. And then after that, you're essentially just going into tank depot and then just pumping out Shermans till the end of time.
That's an affirmative.
Beyond that, you have your various abilities. Make sure to make use of stuff like your smoke and air resupply, as they are very powerful. But that is the general build order. It's a relatively straightforward one and is quite a lot of fun. The build is, I think, relatively powerful, and notably is extra powerful against the Wehrmacht because they don't have good light vehicles, meaning you can go for something like a Greyhound very safely and really put the pressure on them. Although be careful of them rushing out a Whirlwind. If you see Luftwaffe Pioneers, it's probably better to rush the Chaffee out first thing in order to make sure you have an adequate counter for that, because that is one of the quickest ways that this build can fall apart, is if they get out something your light vehicle can't deal with. Otherwise, that is about it. The only other thing I could see covering is the grenade package. The grenade package kind of depends. I generally pick it up after I've got in pretty much everything and I'm waiting on Tank Depot. But if you're playing against the Desert Africa Corps, you could actually tech this really early. And the reason for this is that you really want to keep your Weasel alive. And the sticky bombs helps it so you can snare like an enemy half-track and make sure it doesn't get to dive and kill your Weasel. I'd play very conservatively against the Desert Africa Corps because of this.
Ready for deployment,
And
sir.
the side tech into grenades can even make sense, even if it does slow your vehicles a bit. But otherwise, that is all I have for you today. I hope this build is successful for you. I've had a lot of fun with it, and I do perform quite well with it. So, again, if you enjoy this video, make sure to like and subscribe. Also, again, tell me down in the comments below if you try this and whether or not it works for you. Also, let me know if you want to see more content. I have more ideas for Company of Heroes 3, and I'm curious if people watching this want to see more. But otherwise, thanks so much for watching to the end of the video, and I hope you have a good day.